Thanks for joining us on this next Augmented Society Network virtual salon that we're having here, where we're talking about community. We're talking about the time where there was BBS and chat rooms, and the users were just considered to be loners and introverts. And then social media took shape, and we've really blurred the lines between social insulation and community activation. Things have certainly changed and forced us to reconsider our relationship to community. We increasingly meet online, talk to friends and relatives on platforms like Skype and even this one, Zoom, and depend on our tech for our sense of self. And with Facebook currently creating a fully immersive environment to tempt quote unquote citizens into spending time in its virtual world, where will we define person, place, and community? Technology usage and adoption is closely tied to society and cultural factors. Viewing every technology that has ever succeeded isn't how it actually enabled shaping by the people and users, and not necessarily just commuted by the companies developing and deploying them. Governments have been toppled. Music, art, and technology festivals have taken on a new meaning as tentpole meeting places for those otherwise only digitally connected. So the question is, where are we going? Where will it end? Has it ever really begun? Zoe, you're in a space right now at the RSA house in London. What's your take on community as we hear noises behind you where people are coming together and sharing ideas?
So it's my first visit to Rothmel's, the newly redesigned coffee house here at RSA House in London. I've been really struck by the differences in the different spaces that you can sit in. There's a casual, more noisy place, which I managed to find. And then sound, I guess, goes up and down depending on the shape of the room, the purpose of the room. There's a room here for collaboration, a typical whiteboard able to write on the walls. I'm now sitting on the steps, which is designed to host virtual meetings, but I'm sitting here on my own talking to people that are 5,000, 3,000 miles away. So my sense of community currently, being in London on my own, exists in front of me on my screen. The place now, I think, is beautifully done to enable different kinds of conversations. And you have the underlying community, which is the fellowship of the Royal Society. So I was able to have a couple of meetings earlier with people, talk about some great new AI reports and new ways of talking about AI. It feels a little empty to me currently just because I feel alone, but it is a wonderful space. It's so different to the space that I visited 10 years ago, 8 years ago even. And I think it's definitely been developed with community in mind. So it's going to be interesting to see how it grows. But it's, 7 o'clock here in London? The place is full. Lots of people doing different things, arranged meetings, casual meetings. It feels alive. So it's absolutely wonderful to be here.
So the question is, how much do you think was precluded by how we communicate digitally and the setup of that space and the usage of that space? I just bring up one thing that has nothing to do with digital, but before they redid the space, you would be there after hours and it was basically a ghost town. So the fact that you're there now and there's activity is because the space was provided, and we certainly have seen that digitally. Can you point to anything physically there that you can say, this might have been inferred by how we use social or how we use digital platforms?
What spaces were inspired by the use of online communities, do you mean?
Mm-hmm.
I guess where I am right now, the steps, although we are aware that you still need people around to create the sense of community, to field questions. If you're having a bigger discussion about something, it's still relatively one way if you're in the audience. And I think both you and I experienced that when we were here. So whatever you design, you still need to have a human moderator, somebody noticing somebody who wants to speak, enabling them to speak. And I think that was a concern that the RSA had in the early days of having discussions that only the loudest were heard. And I think this actually enables the quieter person, but it still is fundamentally managed by a person.
It's interesting with the steps you think about, or for me, I think about Google. And when we talked about this new technology, this new media, this paradigm, whether we want to say it was the mid to late 90s that it began, and we started seeing all office spaces change. But certainly with Google, the fact that they have the steps where they would have all hands meetings on the steps, which steps ain't a new thing. You know, there's been amphitheaters since, you know, the Greek times or Roman times or just long ago. So it is interesting that what goes around comes around. Mitchell, what are your thoughts on physical to digital?
So, well, just as you're talking about Google's meetings on the steps, I think that if we were talking about meetings on the steps 2,000 years ago, it would be a different spelling of the word steps.
It's probably gone through 14 different spellings.
Right. So, you know, like as you're talking about community, I think Google had this live, you know, these live communities, and they determined the way people talked with the meetings on the steps. Even the people at Google, though, couldn't get a social network going because their Google Plus just didn't work. And so it's like, well, why did Google Plus not work? Whereas why did Facebook, whether you think that it works or not, it certainly has a large number of people using it. So why is that working in a certain sense, and why is Twitter working in a certain sense? And then for live events, why do some live events just seem to attract thousands or tens of thousands of people? You can get a live event that's on paper could have better speakers or better topics, and they'll struggle, you know, they'll get maybe nobody coming, or maybe only 25 people coming.
One thing I noticed with Google was the use of a circle. And the use of circles, possibly, obviously we've used them for a long time, but as a communication concept to professionals I know and to social media users, they're a relatively new concept. I became aware really of them from, you know, the speaking circle, but equally holacracy, or the application of holacracy, where you create circles that are filled with people with different skills to enable a task to be done. I wonder if the concept was just because you had to know people to link up to, and maybe you just didn't have anyone, so you didn't like to be reminded that you had no one at that point. It felt like an organization mechanism too soon to me. I think, Jonathan, we were mentioning software that takes on a life of its own, where it's actually developed for one thing, but you find a way of using it.
As we said in the intro, there's companies that come out and say, we think this is what's going to work. And then they do that. And then the people actually start using, and they find ways around and change things. And I don't know, when regular texting came about, if they were thinking about how it was going to completely bastardize language, how we were going to start using letters instead of saying C, S-E-E, writing C, S-E-E, putting in C, the letter, or instead of F-O-R, putting in the number 4, how that's changed language. We see the after effects of that. Letters, numbers, anything, emoticons, whatever you want to call them, emojis, we're still seeing that people aren't spelling out everything. We've come up with a shorthand. What's interesting to me is that if we think about historical forms of communication, there was always the same sort of prescription of whether you have somebody in the front of the room talking and presenting, or whether you had that circle of people that were going around and having a conversation, or even just two people, it was a back and forth. And with technology, every platform we bring up, there's different forms of communication. Like there's different formats of that. So whether it is Facebook that, you know, I happen to come in 2 months after the last comment was made, I'm going to put another comment in. There's no real space or time. You have WhatsApp. If you're part of a large group, and I know some people that are really part of a large group, if you weren't around last week, you ain't seeing what was spoken about last week. And certainly with WhatsApp, if you didn't know those people already, you weren't getting into conversation with them. So that's sort of that same Google Plus thing. We're working with a company now that is really utilizing that WhatsApp mentality for community, so that anybody could really come in and join the conversation about specific themes, fandoms, etc. I think they've got technical chops for it, and they will succeed in that. It'll be interesting to see how people take on to that ability, where it's, I'm going to join this group to specifically talk about X. And then if I want to talk about something else, I got to move to someplace else.
Right.
And that's a whole different way than we've been thinking about communication period. We talk about communication with our friends, and you get on the phone and you say, hey, what's going on? And you start talking about, this is what happened at work. Oh, and this is what's going on with the family. Oh, and then we're visiting and traveling here. Like, really, you can talk about any topic. It's interesting to see how and if technology has changed that.
So one thing is that you tend to form groups with people that could be very, very short term. With technology. The group that comes together, you do something, and then you may never be in another group with that person or those people again. It's kind of interesting, right?
To be brutally honest, though, the opportunity for us to connect, and we're on these calls a lot. I don't mean, like, to even call them calls is funny, right? Because we've got video, we can see each other. Mitchell, I know that painting behind you, that's now normal to me. You know? Mm-hmm. And that type of specific event-based connection in some forms, we have these types of connections in others.
Yep.
Which is, again, the ability is pretty awesome. And as we talk about, when I just said calls, future generations, are they even going to know what a call is?
So if there's an abbreviated WhatsApp, which my nephew, but it isn't cool. It certainly isn't cool, but he knows exactly what he means, where he needs to be, how he needs to do it, what I need to be able to do it. And so the groups are forming by marketing, by wording, by exclusion in terms of vocabulary. And some of that is based on your ability to adopt the technology, or you're already there. You don't know anything else, which I think is the case increasingly for the teenagers.
Both of my kids came after the iPhone came after. So they don't know any different than having a device where you can swipe.
Mm-hmm.
It's good to know that there's still time for human activity, though, even though you've had an iPhone.
Right. So I've been volunteering for AFS, which is a high school exchange program, for probably 17 years. And the way we used to pull kids together has so changed. I mean, it used to be that if you wanted to do something with all the kids, you had to call, let's say, all 20 kids in the New York area and get them on the phone. And then it was, you do emails. Now, the problem with emails is you may never hear from people. So, the ones you didn't hear from, you had to call also. Then probably around 7 years ago, we would do Facebook. And when we first started using Facebook, the kids were like, oh, wow, we get to use Facebook? We're allowed to use that? And so they were really excited. And then it became, parents were like, well, do we have to use Facebook? But they started coming onto the Facebook groups also. In the last 3 years, we haven't had any of the kids use the Facebook group. We have one adult who's been allowed into their WhatsApp group. So we have the one adult who's allowed to communicate with them with WhatsApp. And so we have
the chosen one.
Yeah, the chosen one. No, everybody else, it's like we can either call their houses, leave a message for them, or we have a list of their phone numbers, call their phone numbers. But there's no mass way for us to pull together a group of kids to go into New York City or go ice skating or something. It's just been interesting watching the ways we communicate evolve. And so it's now become really difficult to organize stuff for the kids to do.
That's interesting and crazy, right?
Yes,
the fact that we think that we're streamlining, and then things sort of get torn apart for so many reasons, not necessarily technical reasons, but perception reasons and and allowance reasons. And
does that mean then the only absolutely assured method of communication is a letter? If you want to absolutely guarantee that the child has heard
because then you send a letter and the mail service doesn't get it to somebody, or they get it to them much later. Unfortunately, it's got to be everybody individual.
Right. You have to, you call their home because they don't answer, the kids don't answer their phones. Okay. Right. So you call the home number or the parents, you get the parent on the phone, you tell them about the event and ask them to go ask the kid, are they interested in coming?
Wow.
I'm going to create a new app called Emissary. And all it does is it just reaches out to the parents. Will you please go ask your cool kid?
Right.
If there's interest here.
And so do you ever just think actually it's too much to organize something? Has that sort of, when your thought processes?
Oh yeah, it's always it's like, so how much effort is it going to be to do this? But we may end up doing fewer events.
Interesting. But I wonder if it's
it's about what cost.
a signal of our times. Having gone to CES, one of the big topics of conversation was the tiredness of having to connect different devices, go forward in 10 years, and it really will be that invisible tech, or will it just be even worse than it is now?
I work with this Finnish company that has an app for kids, or actually for schools, for digital storytelling, and they have a good relationship with Apple. And Apple is really pushing them to use some of the latest features in augmented reality. Now, those latest features only work on iPads that have been sold in the last year. So what they're doing is trying to get, the latest and greatest to force people to upgrade to the latest iPads. Whereas, if they weren't doing that, you could use an iPad for 4 or 5 years. It'd be fine. So some of these changes are being forced is the wrong word, but strongly encouraged by enterprises that have a different mission than connecting us. And connecting us may be the way they accomplish what their mission is, but they mostly want to connect us in order to do something else. And some of them are profit making, but some of them are power making.
Right. It's interesting when you put it that way. You think back to broadcast. There were certain protocols that were followed for decades. And so you could always make a picture look better, but you knew how you were going to distribute that. And you knew that if you were able to get it to the satellite, you were golden, effectively, because everything was the same. Right. And so you would have TVs for 10, 15 years. And all you had to do was just change the vacuum tube if something was going wrong. Now there's, whether it was originally, I don't even know if they called it 2K, but certainly 4K and now 8K. And when we're looking at our devices with all the different distribution points and what's compatible with this and what's compatible with that. And I know that with video compression, you almost have, there's so many companies that have been built because they have to compress in so many different codecs and so many different forms that just send us your source. Back in the day used to be beta or something.
So how much of that is actually driving where you yourself go? How much of an effort is it to join something? How much effort will you make, I guess, is on how much you want that feeling of community or that moment of sharing with others. But it does seem to me that that's not going to be simplified. It's interesting whether how you're going to drive people or how they drive themselves to these different places.
Right. It's kind of like a curve, because it was really difficult to organize events in 2003 or 2004. So maybe we'd do only 1 or 2 events a year. And then starting in maybe 2007 all the way through, let's say, 2015, it was really easy to get people. And even if we didn't get all of them, we got a critical mass. So we might have 5, 6, 7 events during the course of the year where the kids would get together. And now it's become more difficult again. So, we're down to 3 or 4 events, and maybe we'll go down even further if it continues to get more difficult. And it's not difficult. The kids just aren't using the technologies that would make it easy.
Or it's just so diverse that to try to use that one megaphone that reaches them all.
Right. Yeah.
But then if we go back to a previous discussion we had about is the internet falling together or apart, it was slightly comical, but when we are actually seeing countries test their own internets and cut down access, when you have Apple saying, no, we can't drop the lightning fitting because it will create so much waste, where's the desire, where's the drive to actually create community? Are we really going to be the world of the phone zombie? Has the phone zombie won?
So what's the phone zombie?
Walking around London today, I would say at least 10 to 20% of the people in the street are watching their phones. You've seen it, Mitchell. It's just
right.
I'm looking at that. I'm not part of the world around me, with other services shortening content to fit the phone zombie attention or desire for continued storytelling. Mm-hmm. Does that mean that's one then? There is no need to strive for universal contact.
Are they watching content, or are they doing a combination of watching content and or communicating with other people.
I know when I was on the tube, and it was before there was some Wi-Fi, but it's still sort of limited. But mostly it was people playing games. It wasn't people checking emails and responding and or having the conversation. Where are you going out for? Where are you grabbing a pint tonight? Here in LA, like everybody's in their car, so you don't see. It's funny. You'll see some people walking with their noses in their device.
Right.
And look. I think it really comes down, as always, to humanity, to how we choose to move to the point of why would somebody want to do the work to get into a community? It's because it's what's the risk reward. And if all the cool kids to that person are in that mall, they're going to try to get to that mall to hang with those people. I think that there are powers. I think there are some people or organizations or entities that benefit from our separation, that benefit from decreasing community. And I think that we've certainly seen enough of the echo chambers that exist where people will go into their little micro groups. But we've also seen where people have thrived in communication about the arts or other things of interest that really see humanity burgeoning and growing and showing beautiful things. And it's the nature of the beast. I think that for as much growth as we will have, it's sort of human nature that we've got to have like a reset at times. And it feels like what you were talking about, Mitchell, with communication was so easy, and then it got a little bit funky. In order to be a part of this exchange program, we have to implant something in your brain.
Right.
So you will know when we want you to appear. I hope it doesn't turn to that, but I find it interesting that you as an organization are not able to say, look, this is the way we're communicating. It's your responsibility as a participant to follow, whether it's the email, whether it's we're going to have everybody on a group text. So that's an interesting thing too. And I'm sure there's reasons why you haven't focused on getting that uniformity.
Yeah. I mean, we're all volunteers.
Right.
And so they're coming through an organization, and we just we're the volunteers who are supporting them. And and we know that if we support them, if we can get them together for a certain, like ice skating in New York City, or going to the looking at the shop windows during Christmas or so, they'll have a better time. But there's nothing it's not a forced thing that they have.
Right. It's not. Yeah. Okay.
The forced things, we know we have to put the effort in, and they're kids. We're dealing with teenagers. So if you set up a rule, that automatically triggers something in their mind that, oh, let me see how much can I break the rule? What can I get away with?
Yeah, that's fantastic.
But we were in South America with my sister and my brother-in-law, and my brother-in-law is a huge sports fan, loves to watch sporting events. At the same time he watches the sporting events, he's on 2 or 3 different social media feeds talking to people about the events. So with digital rights, he can't get the events in South America on his phone anymore because, it obviously senses where he is and yada, yada, yada. So what he ended up doing is, his daughter's an adult, so his daughter was watching on TV. She then FaceTimed the TV that he could then see in Santiago, but because of all the delays, he was 5 to 15 seconds behind the people who were posting things on the social media.
Yeah, that's an extreme to go to. We talk a lot about how blockchain hopefully will help with digital rights management, but that as we become more global, as we become more anywhere tribal. So whether I'm a fan of a team that I want to watch anywhere or a fan of a show, hell, just looking on my Google feed of news as I'm going through, this video is not available where you are because it's a feed that comes off of a UK publication. It's certainly for the story you just told, the person is obviously just traveling, right? And they shouldn't lose the rights that they would otherwise be afforded by being somewhere in the States.
So in Vegas, for example, if there's a big fight, you cannot see it on local television. So people go and stay in hotels to have watch parties. One of the biggest new hotels downtown is designing itself around watch parties. Watch parties are seemingly the future of some types of entertainment. That, I mean, I must say, it's a lot easier to travel now than it was 15 years ago when I had to reset my laptop to say if I'm in the UK or the US. And I could only do that 3 times and, game over. But I'm interested in the concept of community around the live event and something high value. I don't like boxing particularly, but that seems to be, one of the big things. Some of the things, Jonathan, we've been talking about, and I think, Mitchell, you mentioned them at the start, big music events online and using augmented and mixed realities to be able to do that. But there has to be something that's driving that attendance. It has to be something that people want. And that desire is massive in terms of, I'll drive to a hotel, I'll pay $300 for the night just to watch this.
Right.
Having in a past life worked in the hospitality industry, specifically sports bar management, that whole concept of going somewhere to join a community to watch is not new. A Monday night football, you would have people pack the bar on Monday, even if they weren't a fan of the team, just to watch and be a part of a community.
Yep.
And we've certainly spoken about different properties like Fortnite, where people are joining a virtual community. And even though that there's nothing real about the space where, we've talked about Marshmello having that concert and looking around you and seeing all the people around you, it's something that we need to keep our fingers on about looking at how do people interpret those realities, those community, is the visceral element, does that replace fully being in a physical space with others at a concert? So
there's the concert, which is kind of enjoying it as, or an event, enjoying as part of the community. There's also the gaming. There's a lot of games where you form groups of 2 to 20 people in your group, and then you're battling another group of 20 people who and your group of 20 people may be a close-knit group that has never physically met each other, but they've been together for 3 months, 6 months, 2 years.
Have you read Reamdy yet by Neil Stevenson? It's based on gaming, but the story actually plays out in reality, but the reality is a book.
What's the name?
Reamdy. It's a play on README. It's actually a virus that spreads through a README file and that takes over the online game, but the action is in the real world in terms of chasing down the hackers who've taken hold of the game. It's absolutely fantastic in the way that it maps reality and the game in one space, the book, i.e., and in one place, one of the lead characters is actually shot in real life in the book, and it mirrors him and his avatar, which is programmed, if it's injured, to wander back home, and he's wandering back home at the same time in the book. It's a fantastic crossover between the real and the virtual, and obviously experienced almost entirely in your own head. And I think it raises questions about how we perceive real, because to me, this is the realest thing I've done today in terms of meaning. And yet I've been in my hometown of London. It's been, an incredible experience, but I'll get more emotionally, I think, from our hour together.
So it's REAM is?
Ream.de. Neil Stevenson.
And at the end of that, did they take a stand as to whether they were more embodied in the real or the virtual?
Interestingly, I think they had such an effect. The virtual had such an effect on the real that those lines were blurred, because not only was the virtual messing with the real, but the virtual had been messed with in that it had been hijacked.
Right.
So to me, it seemed like a great illustration of the effect across the whole idea of what's real and what's not.
Certainly in social, we're constantly questioning what's real and what's not.
Yeah.
You know, it used to be, certainly when we're talking celebrity and forming imagery, you would have a PR team that would work on, oh, such and such is doing this. And now any of us can go in and Photoshop a background, and we could make it look like we're anywhere, doing anything, looking anyhow. And which that too has challenged our trust, our belief, our understanding of what's important.
So you mentioned Amazon at the beginning, Jonathan. Sorry to talk over you.
Yeah.
They're calling their users citizens. Citizens is a word that suggests to me that we have an idea of how to manipulate the social fabric, how to be part of something based on an ideology, an idea, a way of being together. But what they're very well aware of is that there are no rules in Horizon. How do I just not go in and kill you, come back out, reset, you regenerate, and I come back in and just do it again? But how are we going to stop people just messing like Mitchell's children with the system?
Right.
Our whole idea of life, death, everything has changed, whether it's from digital, from gaming, you know, and let's go lo-fi. My neighbor passed away a number of months ago. I just left a voicemail, and her husband hasn't yet changed the voicemail. So it's still her voice.
Wow.
Right? So that's a digital representation. So hell, if I wanted to hear Wendy speak again, that's how I can do it. I just realized that yesterday. Hell, we talk about social, we talk about community. A colleague of mine who passed away 10 years ago, a dozen years ago, had already put up a Facebook before he passed.
And it's still
and
there.
So I'm still reminded of his birthday. Yeah. And I know that that's a whole big thing about what do you do about that?
Your right to die.
But then again, digitally, yeah, you're right to die digitally. And again, when we look at gameplay and how sometimes you have to kill yourself to move to the next level.
I remember many years ago playing Doom, and I'd just been absolutely hammered by the monsters, and I, by mistake, pressed save. So I could only go back in this moment of, dead, dead. Made me laugh. It still makes me laugh.
What was that Tom Cruise movie that until he got it right, he was just getting killed again and again and again?
Was it Tom Cruise, or was it whatchamacallit Day?
Well, there was Groundhog Day with Bill Murray. He never died though, but but no, it was Tom Cruise. I'm sure there's other movies that have sort of done the same thing where you're brought back, but no, it's just it's an interesting. And I know we're going completely off topic. Yeah, or it's just irrelevant. It's just.
So I was bringing up the killing people and just doing whatever you wanted to do, because one of our questions was, what's the requirement to kind of remain or ensure there's some level of humanity in the virtual space, or is it just going to go downhill? Because I know we have places less so in London now, but that are no-go areas. Are there places where, as there were in the alt groups on the message boards, that were absolutely no-go areas, possibly illegal in places? How do we, that will always happen. So what do we do to safeguard?
I think it's self-citizenship, if we want to go with that citizen thing. I think that there are so many places to go that weren't available before. There's so many no-go zones that people choose to go for right or wrong, better or worse, what have you. We talk about the dark net. We talk about communities that have been able to come together and have conversation that didn't have that availability before. And if we're going to accept the positive things or what we deem to be positive, then we also have to acknowledge that there are negative implications. And
but you're not suggesting the Chinese model, are you? Where I report you, or to become a good citizen as a metric. Right.
No. I guess by putting citizen, then you're sometimes they're going into that sort of Soviet communal element. But I think that's why I said it's sort of self.
Yeah, you've just made that up, so I don't know what that means.
That wasn't the first thing I made up.
Well, you're a futurist. You're supposed to.
Yeah,
no,
exactly.
But I think it's always been that you can pick who you want to hang with, right? You can pick your friends, you can pick your crew, whatever it is. I think we're the same thing here. You know, there's going to be haters. There's going to be people that choose to fall to the gravity of negativity. And there's others that will choose to rise up. And I don't want to get all esoteric and everything, but there's always been that battle between light and dark. And I don't think that's going to end with digital. I don't think digital is going to have the solution. And then the question becomes, if we want to get deeper, is should it? Because once you have one factor deeming what's right, what happens with the power there? Digital has allowed us to do things that we never dreamed possible.
Like this. Like having a conversation in 3 completely different places, seeing each other, and all, to a certain extent, knowing each other.
Yes.
It's also made possible those things that we wish never were. Back in the 80s, Faces of Death, VHS, where somebody was taking video of actual people dying, like getting killed or what have you, and then they were profiting off of selling these VHSs. Like that existed, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And you know, you talk about going, Zoe, the no-go zones in London, where you weren't going to go there. So that happened, right? And I think that we have to be wary, and all we can do is, I think, is bring ourselves up and hold ourselves up to the level that hopefully we all want to be at a higher level.
Yeah.
And,
have you
and
seen
hope that others come along.
Don't F with Cats, the documentary?
No, I don't F with cats because I'm allergic to them.
Unless
you're talking about KATZ and it's a person.
No,
Mr. Katz,
it's
Dr. Katz.
a relatively new documentary about a guy who does terrible things to cats and ends up murdering someone. The documentary follows the people who are trying to track him, and it brings up some interesting questions about what I want to see, what I was shown, and how I feel changed by having seen it, and not for the good. I think it raises lots of questions about how social aided or created the ability of the murderer to be someone, and also enabled him to develop. And the question being was, were those people who were watching what was going on feeding his path to more and more gruesome acts?
I think the person who started Alibaba, so he had such a, I just saw a video of his a day or two ago where he was saying the best opportunities lie where people are complaining the most. He saw that, 20 years ago, people were complaining that when they went on the internet, they couldn't find anything from China. So he just started posting HTML pages and things from China, and that became Alibaba. And so if you listen carefully or you look carefully, well, what are people most complaining about? Then you see the opportunities that most exist today. So
last week I went to it was a speaker series that Stubbs Alderton has. I'm a mentor for their Pre-Accelerator program. And somebody was talking about data for startups and start, how to build out your company. And I was interested in hearing what she had to say. And she started asking, what kind of data should you look for? And all the things like, what are site visits, all those types of quantitative pieces. And I said, what about sentiment? What about going and seeing what people are saying in these communities and all that? And she straight up poo-pooed it and said, oh, that's not important.
Wow.
And I couldn't take seriously anything she said after that. So, Mitchell, to your point, it's people are talking about this stuff. And if you're not paying attention to sentiment, people have used digital or whatever we're talking about now for community as a way to make real change, as a way to air grievances, as a way to bring up possibilities, as a way to incite as well as excite. That's where the damage is going to come.
So as it becomes easier and easier to listen, will fool us if we don't.
Exactly.
Well, and part of that is there's a humanness about us that separates us from everything else. It separates us as individuals also. And it's always coming back to what's human about me, what's human about this group, not just the data, the number of people, the time doing something.
And on that note, I think we'll have to wrap up.
Thank you.
That was incredibly enjoyable.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. Next
Yeah.
time, I get the wine.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. At some point, we'll all be in the same place. But
That'd be great.
I'm
Yeah.
going to say goodbye from London.
Okay. Goodbye from New York.
Cheers. Goodbye from Los Angeles. Have a good one, y'all.